I hand over the mic to Fakir Aijazuddin, I am going to make a few announcements, so I'm going to keep you away from him for just a little night. To welcome Mr. Fakir Aijazuddin in today's evening program over here. He's a man of many parts, it seems. He just told me that he started his career as an accountant, and then we know that he's been a sort of a politician in the government, in the Punjab government. And he's, of course, an art historian, and we'll be looking forward to some of the paintings I hope he's going to show us today. And he's written a lot. Amongst them, his book on Pahari paintings and Sikh portraits in the Lahore Museum. He's written on Sikh portraits by European artists. And he's also written on, he has a book on Lahore, on the rare books of Pakistan, and he has written on foreign policy of Pakistan as well. So clearly, he has many, many different dimensions to him. And without much ado, I hand over the mic to him. We all look forward to hearing you speak.
Thank you very much indeed, Anshu. Just before I start, I'd like to make the formal announcement. Since it's Oscar night, last night, there are obligatory thank yous, which one has to say. First of all, to thank Mr. Mahesh Rangarajan, the director, for his kind invitation to be here. He himself is not here. He's wiser than I am. So he's gone away on a mission. But I'm particularly grateful to you, Anshu, for introducing me. You said that I'm a man of many parts, and I've written a number of books on diverse subjects. And I must share with you a story at my own expense. When somebody said to me, how many books have you written? And I said, well, about 16. Oh, she said, which subjects? So I said, well, different ones, Pahari paintings, Sikh portraiture, on rare maps, 2 on Aitchison College, my alma mater, and then 2 on foreign policy, and then memoirs, and she said, varied subjects. So I said, yes. और फिर उन्होंने उर्दू में कहूँगा because the word has more meaning in that. अच्छा, तो क्या आप एक मौजू पर तवज्जो से काम नहीं कर सकते? तो forgive me, मैं जो भी कहूँगा तवज्जो के साथ कहूँगा. I'll try anyway. But thank you all for being here this afternoon, and particularly friends who have come from all over India, and particularly from Karnal. So, Gurdeep and Tani, thank you so much indeed. They've come all the way from Karnal, which is actually closer to Lahore than it is to Delhi. This morning, I had the privilege of visiting my guru and my mentor, Sardar Khushwant Singh. We first met in 1978, and that was 36 years ago. He's now 99 years old. And I met him very briefly, but he said to me, I want to be buried in Lahore. Tanu pata hai, main Pakistani hega. Main said, you're more of a Pakistani than I am. So he said, nahi, and then very affectionately, he said, you've written this book. He was all there. He knew the book. He talked about it. He went through the book. And then he said that, Tu kahan ja rahe hai? I said, I'm leaving tomorrow. He said, why? I said, well, I have to go back. And then I kissed his hand, and he said, I'm 99 years old. I said, meri umar aapko lage. And he said, nahi. And then he took my hand and he kissed it. And I was so touched. The reason I mention this is because time and borders had no significance. And I was honored, I have been honored, to be his acolyte, his student, his pupil, because there's no other person who can claim to be the doyen of Sikh history as much as Sardar Khushwant Singh. One should remember that when he's 99 years old, it meant that he was born in 1915, which is when the First World War had just started. And it was only 99 years before that, before his birth, that Maharaja Ranjit Singh was on the throne of Lahore. So that gives you an idea of the span of history, as it were. And it's really with a lot of love and enormous admiration and very respectfully that I dedicate this lecture to him. I'll be talking about the resourceful faqirs, the three faqir brothers at the Sikh court of Lahore. No image encapsulates. Can you see, by the way, or would you like the lights off? I think it might be easier. Yeah. This enables you to sleep quietly without being noticed. Okay? Is that all right? Yeah. Oh, right. Can you see it from the back clearly? And no image encapsulates the richness, the color, the spectacular grandeur of the Sikh court of Lahore than this panorama by the Hungarian artist August Schöft. Although it was completed in 1855, the drawings had been done in 1840 when he visited Lahore, and he included in this vast panorama almost every significant personality at the Sikh Darbar. Can I ask you to switch your mobiles off? Because you'll only wake up the person sitting next to you. So.
So important.
When in 1855 the painting was exhibited, almost every significant personality at the Sikh Darbar was dead. At its epicenter was the diminutive, So whoever she is, tell her she's too late. At its epicenter was the diminutive, one-eyed, wizened Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Like the Emperor Akbar, Ranjit Singh had come to the throne, and in his case, becoming head of the Sukha-Chakia missile, at the age of 12. By 1809, he was the master of Lahore, and soon to become the master of the Punjab. Recognition came slowly, and it came from the British in about 1805, 1806. In 1805, Holkar, the Maratha chief, had been defeated by Lord Lake, commanding the forces of the East India Company. And Lake began negotiations with the then Raja Ranjit Singh and Fateh Singh Ahluwalia. And they were required by Lake not to provide sanctuary to Holkar. In 1806, after some negotiations, a tripart treaty was signed between the East India Company, Raja Ranjit Singh, and Fateh Singh Ahluwalia. The importance of the treaty was that the Punjab, the borders of the Punjab were regarded on its eastern side as the Satluj River, and the British acknowledged Ranjit Singh's supremacy over the areas which lay to the north and to the west, and to Sindh in the south. Now, it was up to Ranjit Singh to convert what became supremacy in the Punjab into sovereignty. And he relied upon a combination of Hindus, Sikhs, and a trinity of Dogras, and 3 Muslim brothers to achieve that. Of the 3, the eldest was Faqir Azizuddin, and in time he became both the spokesman and, in a sense, the foreign minister of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. The second brother, Imamuddin, became the keeper of the Govindgarh fort at just outside Amritsar, which was the Tosha Khana and the artillery center. And the last, Faqir Nuruddin, my lineal ancestor, was the Mehmandar at Lahore, and subsequently became a member of the Regency Council for the young Maharaja Dalip Singh. If I introduce you to the family tree of the Faqirs, I'll first go southwards. From Faqir Nuruddin, there is Shamsuddin, followed by Shahabuddin, Najmuddin, my father Wahiduddin, who wrote the real Ranjit Singh, and then yours truly. If I go northwards, the 3 brothers were Faqir Azizuddin, Imamuddin, and Nuruddin, and above them, their father, Ghulam Muhyiddin, and their grandfather, Ghulam Shah. The information we have about the family from Shahabuddin, Nuruddin's grandson, was contained in a document called the Zulfikar-e Haidari. And it was this document which identified that the family originated from Bukhara, migrated to Utch, and finally settled at Lahore. Their original profession was as Hakims, and it was in their capacity as Hakims that they had the first contact with Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and was with Ghulam Muhyiddin, the father, who had been asked to come and treat a boil on Maharaja Ranjit Singh's body. and this was in 1811. But it was his son whom Ranjit Singh trusted, and trusted enough that when he had an eye ailment, the young man was called and treated the single eye that the Maharaja had. Traditionally, we assume that Azizuddin was the diplomat in the family, but in fact it wasn't true. The middle brother, for some reason, Imamuddin, was deputed to receive Sir Charles Metcalfe, who made a visit in 1808. Imamuddin was joined by his elder brother, but in time was eclipsed by him. Sir Charles Metcalfe was 23 years old when he called on Ranjit Singh in 1808. Ranjit Singh by this time was 28 years old. And his brief, Metcalfe's brief, was to contain French influence following Napoleon's supremacy in France, and also to obtain the permission for British troops to cross the Punjab en route to Kabul. Ranjit Singh was reluctant to allow the British into the Punjab, and certainly not the forces. And so he gave him a runaround for 7 months. Disheartened, Metcalfe threatened to leave and packed his bags. Ranjit Singh realized that he had gone too far, so he sent Azizuddin, who then explained to Metcalfe that the delights of the garden of friendship far exceeded the delights even of a garden of roses. Well, Metcalfe melted, and in April 1809, the Anglo-Sikh Treaty was signed at Amritsar. Ranjit Singh was preeminent in the Punjab, and Azizuddin and his brother Imamuddin moved center stage at the court. Evidence of that proximity is apparent. I'll give you just one example. When Satsat Chand of Kangra, who was the paramount ruler by this time in the hills, and had to be rescued from a Gurkha invasion and siege, when he asked to speak to Maharaja Ranjit Singh privately, alone, Ranjit Singh said, I suggest you speak to Azizuddin, and deflected him. The Anglo-Sikh Treaty, which was signed, confirmed Ranjit Singh's sovereignty over the Punjab. And for the first time in 5,000 years of recorded history, the Punjab emerged as a nation state. It didn't achieve it before and was never to achieve it afterwards. Like every Eastern ruler, Ranjit Singh found it difficult to balance his financial books. And when it came to his son's wedding in 1811, his eldest son, Khadak Singh, was to be married, Ranjit Singh passed the turban around the Sikh Sardars and asked for a contribution. They all pleaded poverty. But they did suggest that Maharaja Ranjit Singh talks to the resourceful fakir. He'll make arrangements, which he did. Another way Ranjit Singh had of augmenting his wealth was by gentle extortion. And there was no one more vulnerable than the Afghan dispossessed ruler Shah Shuja. He had been ousted by his cousin Mahmud Shah, and he sought asylum in Lahore. But there was a price for this Ranjit Singh's dangerous hospitality, and the price was the Kohinoor. The Kohinoor diamond was worn as an armband, and it was, whenever it was required to be shown, Mr. Mekhraj and Mr. Beliram, who were its custodians, were told that you put your fingers around the thread and never hand it to anybody. Obviously, Shah Shuja had never learned this trick from Mr. Beliram. What was the value of the Kohinoor? Well, the British tried to persuade Maharaja Ranjit Singh to cough up 1,25,000 rupees as being the value. Fakir Nuruddin later mentioned that when he was asked to write the account of the Kohinoor, he wrote a manuscript called the Tarikh-e-Kohinoor, and he interviewed Wafa Begum, who was the widow of Shah Shuja. And her response, when she was asked what was the value of the Kohinoor, was, if you were to throw a stone as far north as possible, as far south as possible, as far east as possible, and as far as west as possible, and the fifth stone as high as you can in the sky, and fill that entire space with gold, it'll still be less than the value of the Kohinoor. In 1820, by 1820, Nuruddin emerges, and his initial responsibilities were as the Mehmandar. And he was host to a succession of Farangis. And they were attracted by the growing reputation of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's glorious and colorful empire. The first such visitor was the veterinarian William Moorcroft. In those days, England did not have a veterinary school, so he had to study in France. And he came back and set up his practice on what is now Oxford Street, opposite Selfridges. His purpose of coming to the Punjab was en route to obtaining horses at Bukhara. And in 1820, he wrote to Maharaja Ranjit Singh and asked for his cheerful assent to visit the Punjab. And it's in his diaries and his papers that we owe an account of the city of Lahore, which he described as being well fortified, but with, through the congested old city, a drain which was very smelly, which passed through the center of the city. The next visitor after Moorcroft was Dr. Martin Honigberger. He was a Transylvanian doctor, and he spent 2 periods in the Punjab, for 5 years between 1828 and 33, and then again for 11 years from 1838 until the annexation of the Punjab. Being a medical allopathic doctor, of course, he resented the fakirs, so much so that he sneered that these rich fakirs exercise a magical influence over the Maharaja. Victor Jacquemont, a French botanist, had felt no such rivalry. He came in 1831, and he was met by Shah-Din, Azizuddin's third son. And it is to him that we owe this rather telling description of the Fakir brothers. Among his most intimate counselors, Jacquemont had written, are 3 Mohammedan brothers who conceal their wealth under an outward appearance of poverty and seek to atone for their intrusion by the humility of their behavior. All of them bear the title of Fakir, as do their sons. They know Arabic and have read the medical books in that language, hence their reputation for deep scientific knowledge. The eldest, whom I met near Amritsar, is more or less Minister of Foreign Affairs, and it's he who writes all the dispatches from Ranjit to the British government. Another, Imamuddin, is the trusted agent at Govindgarh, and the third, Nuruddin, whom I meet every day, is sometimes appointed governor of the city when Ranjit does not take him away with him. These brothers have a cipher which they use in correspondence amongst themselves, and with this artifice hitherto, I believe, unknown in the East, it gives them a reputation for great cleverness. In the same year, 1831, Alexander Burns, arrived in Lahore, and he was sent by William IV with some gifts for Maharaja Ranjit Singh. He chose to come via the Indus, not across from Firozpur, but via the Indus. And the purpose was quite simple. He wanted to determine the navigability for British troops up the Indus. The Amirs of Sindh were naturally reluctant to allow this, and for good measure, because they knew that the moment it had been mapped, then there were no secrets as far as the Indus was concerned. Burns brought with him 1 dray horse and 4 mares. Ranjit Singh looked at them and was startled at the size and also their lack of spirit. They were actually dray horses used for transporting beer. But Ranjit Singh, never one to look a gift horse in the mouth, he asked Azizuddin to draft a letter of acceptance. And Azizuddin wrote that the horses are of superior quality, of singular beauty, of alpine form and elephantine stature. They are in beauty, stature, and disposition. They surpass the horses of every city and every country in the world. On beholding their shoes, the new moon turned pale with envy and nearly disappeared from the sky. Such horses, the eye of the sun has never beheld in its course throughout the universe. And unable as I am to bestow on them in writing the praises they merit, I am compelled to throw away the reins of the neck of the steed of description and relinquish my pursuit. Well, the horses survived for about a couple of years, after which they were relegated to the stables. By 1830, Azizuddin had become Ranjit Singh's diplomatic spokesman. And it was in April 1831, when he visited Shimla, that Lord Bentinck asked him the famous question, which eye of the Maharaja is blind? And Azizuddin replied that the splendor of his face is such that I am not able to determine which one of them. Lord Bentinck wanted to open the Indus to commerce, and he was therefore very keen that there should be a bilateral meeting with Ranjit Singh. The questions that needed to be determined, and Azizuddin was sent for this purpose, was where, when, and how. And it was decided finally that the first move would be made by the British, where, at Ropar, when, October 1831, and how, as equals. Ranjit Singh was now demanding parity with the East India Company. They met at Ropar in the famous meeting of what was described as the Camp of the Cloth of Gold, and Maharaja Ranjit Singh then crossed from his howdah as an gesture of friendship, and crossed and sat in Bentinck's howdah. Bentinck wanted a record of the meeting, so he secreted an artist called Jeevan Ram under his sofa. And so Jeevan Ram did the first authentic portrait of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and Bentinck and his wife were feted, and after the banquet, they crossed the river back to their camp. When they left, a report was immediately sent to Ranjit Singh that Lord Bentinck had assisted his wife as she stepped out of the boat. And it somehow triggered off a sentimental overflow from Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And the scribe mentions, in an unusually maudlin mood, Ranjit Singh described how moved he had been when told how Lord Bentinck had taken his wife's hand as she alighted from the boat. It indicated his heartfelt affection and deep love between the Nawab Sahib, Governor-General, and the Begum Sahiba, wife of the Governor-General. Ignoring the court chronicler, who recorded every word of his, Ranjit Singh spoke of the love he felt for his wife, the Muslim Mora. And he said that he had exactly the same kind of love and unity with her, and could not prepare his mind to accept separation from her even for a moment. And every moment they remained fully aware of each other's doings. The most intriguing visitor of this time was Dr. Joseph Wolff. He was a Jew, converted to Roman Catholicism, and rather uppity. So when he went to Rome, he put his arm around the Pope and treated him as an equal. When he came to Lahore, he was similarly over-familiar with Maharaja Ranjit Singh. When he arrived, he sported a beard, but had it shaved off. And when he appeared before the next time before Maharaja Ranjit Singh, he said, "Where's your beard? Where's your sign of manliness?" So he said, "Well, I left it at the house of one of your generals." And he said, "Well, call him here and I'll cut off his nose." Ranjit Singh, though, despite all of these visitors, and most of them were benign, could never forget the tensions on his northwest border. And they were personified by the Afghan ruler, Dost Muhammad. The British were very keen on ousting him. And in the last campaign, Ranjit Singh took the field himself. And there is a record of him talking to Azizuddin, and he asks Azizuddin, "Why did Burns give a telescope to Dost Muhammad?" To which Azizuddin replied, "Perhaps Dost Muhammad is very short-sighted, and he needed the telescope." Azizuddin was sent to negotiate with Dost Muhammad. And Dost Muhammad, as Azizuddin later reported, contrary to the laws of friendship, he abducted Azizuddin and humiliated him and said, "How can you eat the salt of a Sikh, being a Muslim?" But he didn't wait for the reply. He fled, and he left the fort of Ali Masjid to Maharaja Ranjit Singh. In June 1836, an Austrian Baron Hugel came, and to him we owe the extensive accounts that we have of Nuruddin and of Azizuddin. And it is Hugel who then is received by the third brother, Nuruddin. And it's clear that Nuruddin had learned something of the art of diplomacy from the elder brother. Because when it begins to rain, and Hugel turns to Nuruddin and says, "Oh, it's raining now," Nuruddin immediately replies, "When princes meet in the garden of friendship, the water bearers of heaven moisten the flowers so that they give out all their perfume." Hugel was accompanied by an artist, Godfrey Vine. And it is to Vine that we owe this portrait of Fakir Azizuddin, which was published in the Illustrated London News in April of 1846. In 1837, Maharaja Ranjit Singh celebrated the wedding of his eldest grandson, Naunihal Singh, who married the daughter of Sham Singh Atariwala. Henry Fane, the commander-in-chief, attended the wedding, and for Ranjit Singh it was an opportunity to show his wealth. If Lord Bentinck, as the Governor-General, had a north-south view, i.e. the Indus, his successor, Lord Auckland, saw it in terms of east and west. And he was obsessed with Afghanistan and to contain not French influence, but Russian influence. And in April 1838, Azizuddin is sent to Shimla to meet Auckland. It's his second visit, and at Shimla, he is portrayed by William Osborne. William Osborne's aunt, the tart Emily Eden, who wrote fascinating letters in a journal form to her family, she describes Azizuddin as a clever man. He's dressed outwardly as a fakir, ought to be, in coarse brown cloth. But if that opens just a little, there's underneath a gold dress embroidered in seed pearls. Emily Eden was, if nothing, observant. And she noted everything. She even noted that perhaps Azizuddin might be better off married to a British woman. And so she tries to organize a match at Shimla between Fakir Azizuddin, who by this time is about 48, 52, and a Miss A. Miss A doesn't turn up for the assignation. Otherwise, you would have had an Englishman sitting here talking about his ancestors. Azizuddin, it is to Emily Eden that we owe this very famous portrait of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, done in Lahore, and it was possible only because she was sitting on his blind side. This painted drawing, which was later published as a lithograph, was copied by William Osborne, her nephew, and after Ranjit Singh's death, he brought it to Lahore, and everybody then gave salams to the picture, and Fakir Azizuddin, weeping, asked for a copy of the picture and was given it. I'm not sure where the picture is now, at least the copy by Osborne. The meeting between Auckland and Ranjit Singh took place at Rambagh and at his summer palace just outside in Amritsar. And it is an example of evidence of Ranjit Singh's popularity that Emily Eden recorded. There's something rather touching in the affection his people have for him. The other day in going through the city, it struck us all, the eagerness with which they called out Maharaja and tried to touch him, which is easy enough in these narrow streets, and considering that the elephants reach the level of the balconies. The meeting at Firozpur was an opportunity for Ranjit Singh to show his forces and for the British to show the army of the Indus. The army was enormous by their standards, but rather than describing the army, let me just brief you on, for example, the logistics which were needed to support such a force. And Shahidin, Azizuddin's son, was made responsible for procuring, and I'm going to read them out to you, 100,000 fowls. Gram, 60,000 maunds. Milk, 1,500 maunds a day. Fuel, 40,000 maunds a day. 15,000 chickens, eggs, 4,000 chickens, and it really didn't matter which came first, the chicken or the egg. And to grind into flour, 3,000 grinding stones. And this is the most interesting part. All the widows of the region were summoned to grind the corn. The route that the army of the Indus had to take, and Ranjit Singh was only too keen to see the back of them, was along the southern side of the Indus and the Satluj River. So the British troops had to go along what is called, you see as the dotted line, as far as Sakhar, cross the Indus, and then proceed up through the Bolan Pass. They entered this kind of terrain, and finally they were able to reach, through this inhospitable pass, they were able to reach Quetta and then on to Kabul. At Kabul, they reinstated Shah Shuja. But Shah Shuja, as Karzai is discovering now, sat on a very insecure throne. And he had experience of this, having been thrown out once. So before leaving, he asked the British whether in the event of a defeat, would he be able to return to his harem, whom he had left behind in Ludhiana? And this is the future king of Kabul. By 1838, the twilight of the Sikh Raj had begun. Friends close to Maharaj Ranjit Singh died. And one of the closest was his general, Hari Singh Nalwa, who died at Peshawar. Another, in January 1839, was the French general, Jean-François Allard. His body was brought back to Lahore, looked after by Nuruddin, and finally buried next to the grave of his young daughter called Charlotte in a place called Kuribagh, named after Charlotte. 6 months later, Ranjit Singh himself died. He died on the 27th of June, 1839. Azizuddin and Nuruddin, his courtiers, but also his physicians, they were in constant attention. Bhai Govind Ram, who was one of the senior Sikhs at the court, he held out hope. But Azizuddin, with far more experience, and with hundreds of regrets, and with a flow of tears from his eyes, said the storm of death and the tempest of demise had risen overwhelmingly. Of the three Dogras and the three Fakirs, Raja Dehan Singh tried to throw himself 4 times on the pyre. The other 2 brothers played politics. The Fakir brothers remained very quiet and abstained from such histrionics. The Samadhi that was built just close to where the fort, which you can see on the right-hand side, was completed by Fakir Nuruddin, begun in 1839 and completed 10 years later in 1849. Following the death of Maharaj Ranjit Singh, the throne of the Punjab passed to his son, Khadak Singh. Unhappy man, addicted to opium, and according to Sir Henry Fane, who met him at his son's wedding, Khadak Singh looked as if he smoked day and night and had smoked away the whole of his intellect. The tension between the father, Khadak Singh, and the son, Naunihal Singh, became apparent. And it got to a point where when Naunihal Singh murdered Chet Singh, who was the favorite of Khadak Singh withdrew from effective control as a Maharaja, and Naunihal Singh, the young, ambitious, impetuous heir, took over. He used Azizuddin and his brother, but whenever it suited him. And on one occasion, Naunihal Singh confronted Azizuddin, and he asked him why Azizuddin always explained letters from the British to the Maharaja in such a manner that the Maharaja acquiesced in them without a word. Azizuddin, too sage to confront this young boy, replied that he'd been employed for the last 30 years in improving relations between the two states, and in any case, no one can decide for a Maharaja. Naunihal Singh had grand ambitions. He asked Nuruddin to build a house for him. Nuruddin said it would cost 1,00,000 rupees. He said, that's no consequence. And so her Haveli was built. It's ironical that Naunihal Singh, fiercely anti-British, that this house that he built, but he was never able to enjoy because he died prematurely, the house that he built is now the Queen Victoria's Girls' High School. It's in the old city. Khadak Singh and his son died within a day of each other in November 1840. They were cremated, and the bone of contention was whether they should allow the British to pass through the Punjab on their way back from Afghanistan. Ranjit Singh, in December 1838, had given permission to the British to do just that. But he refused to put it in writing. And so when, after his death, the British demanded that this agreement be honored, but it was nowhere in writing, so Khadak Singh and Naunihal Singh summon Azizuddin and say, did the Maharaja agree to this? And he said, yes. He said, well, why didn't he put it in writing? He said, because the Maharaja suspected just the kind of reaction that you're showing. The British troops in Kabul were beleaguered, and gradually they had to defend themselves and were then decimated. They were picked off by the Afghan riflemen as they worked their way down the pass, and ultimately, by 1841, there was a lone survivor, Dr. Brydon, who made it to Jalalabad. At Lahore, there were separate cataclysms that followed the death of Khadak Singh and Naunihal Singh. The second son, Sher Singh, was summoned from his estate at Batala, and he made a triumphant entry into Lahore. It wasn't as easy as he had expected, because he was forced to camp outside the fort. There were two factions. One brother, Dehan Singh, supported Sher Singh outside, one Dogra brother outside the fort, and the second Dogra brother, Gulab Singh, inside the fort with Rani Chand Kaur defending the fort. From the minarets of the Lahore Badshahi Mosque, shots were fired into the fort. Bullet holes are still apparent today in what is called the Hathipol, the entrance to the private apartments. And recently, we were able to retrieve a cannonball, which was found in the roof of the Sheesh Mahal. A compromise was achieved. Chand Kaur was supposed to be regent. Sher Singh would be the de facto Maharaja. But they resolved that by killing Rani Chand Kaur with flagstones while she was having a bath. Sher Singh now stood singularly enthroned as the Maharaja of the Punjab. He emptied all the jewels in the Toshakhana on himself, as he was having a bejeweled bath, and resplendent, he took his place on the throne, golden throne of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. The Kohinoor, as an armband, is visible on his right forearm. Saltykov, who saw him, described him as having an air of borrowed majesty. He continued the form of Ranjit Singh's administration, but not the substance. And he continued with the Council of Advisors, including Fakir Nuruddin, whom you can see sitting next to the Akali with a conical turban. Then next to him is Diwan Dinanath, and adjacent to him is Azizuddin. Sher Singh sits in the middle, being advised by Raja Dehan Singh. But it was dangerous advice and dangerous proximity. People warned him against Dehan Singh, but the denouement occurred at the hunting lodge of Shah Bilawal in September 1843, when Ajit Singh Sindhawalia, who felt they had a senior claim to the throne, took a gun, showed it to Sher Singh, and shot him through the chest. Nearby, Sher Singh's son and heir, Pratap Singh, was offering prasad, and he was murdered by Ajit Singh's brother, Lena Singh. They didn't bother to bring the bodies back to the fort. This took place about 5 kilometers away from the fort, and Sher Singh was cremated in situ along with his wives. Ajit Singh Sindhwalia rode back to the fort and encountered Dehant Singh. He told him what he had done, and when Dehant Singh remonstrated, he shot him dead. Naseeruddin heard the news and rushed to the family Haveli to tell Azizuddin, who was by now 63 and almost blind, and he, understanding the significance of what was happening, he fell into a swoon. Dehant Singh's body was brought back to his Haveli, a rather splendid establishment still visible in the old city, and he was cremated there. His son, Hira Singh, then took revenge, but in turn he too was killed. And now it was the turn of the youngest son, Maharaja Dalip Singh. 5 years old, too young to know what was happening, but too important to be excluded from the chess game. The effective ruler was his mother, the formidable Rani Jinda. She had more daring and more bravado than common sense, and she gradually eroded the structure of the Sikh empire. And in this, she was aided and abetted by her lover, Raja Lal Singh. And I'm told there's a descendant of Raja Lal Singh here. Yes? Please confess. Yes. Lady who's sitting, yes. No? Okay. Not. I don't blame you. I wouldn't claim to. Okay. Raja Lal Singh in time too felt casualty, and his suit of armor could do nothing to protect him. Foolishly and in a foolhardy act, the Sikhs crossed the river Satluj. The British, they violated the treaties and understandings, and the British returned the compliment by sending their troops across the Satluj. Pitched battles were fought between the Sikh army and the East India forces, but the decisive battle was at the Battle of Sabran on the 10th of February, 1846, and thus ended the First Sikh War. The Sikh army, once the glory of Maharaja Ajit Singh, stood defeated. Henry Harding, as the Governor-General, came to Lahore and exacted a Treaty of Lahore from the Sikh Darbar. British troops were stationed at Lahore, and a fine was levied of 2 crores of rupees. Henry Lawrence, who established the Lawrence Asylum at Sarnavar, he was appointed the resident at Lahore, and he began to rely upon Nuruddin for advice on how to handle the Sikh Darbar. Nuruddin was promoted and made a member of the Regency Council, and this is a miniature that was done by a man called Hassan al-Din. Dinanath, on the right, was made the head of finance. But as they say, old sins had long shadows, and the oldest sin of all that has bedeviled politics between your country and ours began with Gulab Singh. When the Treaty of Amritsar was signed separately between him and the British, he agreed that the fine levied on the Sikh Darbar would be paid by him. And so with money that he had secreted out of the Lahore Toshakhana, he paid 75 lakhs of rupees in cash and surrendered land worth 1.25 crores of rupees to the East India Company. He rode to Kashmir and added Kashmir to his original state of Jammu, and it is his descendants who then inherited the state. For Azizuddin, the conflict with the British was the antithesis of everything he had worked for. Tet Singh, who was not his fondest admirer, was overheard saying to Rani Jinda that Azizuddin was a fortunate man to have withdrawn from public business 2 years ago and devoted himself to meditating upon God. He leaves behind an imperishable reputation. But perhaps the best epitaph I could read to you was of a letter unprecedented in our history, written by a Governor-General directly to Azizuddin. And he sends it through one of his underlings, and it's addressed to Fakir Azizuddin, it's after compliments. on behalf of the Governor-General, it's written, when worth and talent are united in one person, the modesty of the individual who possesses them will not avail to keep them hidden. Nay, they will of themselves raise their possessor to distinction and place him, though a fakir, among the wise who assist in the council of princes. I've long heard of your high reputation, your fidelity, and your sound discretion, and I've longed to have the opportunity of expressing to you my esteem of your character. I've now found the occasion of being charged with the pleasing duty of conveying to you the expression of the Governor-General's high sense of your great merits, so often shown in the intercourse, which had been the direct means of maintaining between the two governments. That gentleman, this is his underling, is also charged with certain articles which the Governor-General hopes that the Maharaja will allow you to accept from him. They are trifling in value, but serve to mark his lordship's sense of the character of one who has always rested on the staff of truth, who has guided himself according to the laws of honor and fidelity, and who has weighed every action and thought with the care the devout take when telling their beads. Azizuddin died in 1845, and the next fakir to die 2 years after him was Imamuddin, and he dies in December 1847 and was succeeded by his son Tajuddin as the keeper of the Govindgarh fort, where by this time the Tosha Khana had been emptied and the Barut Khana had also was bare. If you go, as you are permitted to do now, to go to Govindgarh fort, this is what you will see of what was the old artillery center. At Lahore, the unquiet spirit, as Henry Lawrence described her, Rani Jinda, caused trouble. They put her on a restricted pension, which she refused to accept. She refused to eat. So they removed her from the Lahore fort to Sheikhupura fort, about 30 kilometers away, in August 1847. There she was kept in the Rani Mahal, and from the window she looked longingly towards Lahore. But even that was too close. So the British externed her, and Nuruddin was asked to accompany her to Benares, where she was kept in exile. That left her son, Dalip Singh, alone. Some years later, in fact, less than a year later, there was a rebellion by Mulraj in Multan, and that precipitated the Second Sikh War. Another round of battles, and this time the conclusive battle was the Battle of Gujarat in February 1849. The Sikhs were not betrayed by their training under Ranjit Singh, they were betrayed by their leadership. The Punjab was annexed in 1849, and Dalhousie sat on the throne of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and the annexation order was read out by Fakir Nuruddin. The Kohinoor was surrendered to Queen Victoria. She had it cut from its original 186 carats to 106, and then wore it as a brooch, which you can see on the left-hand side. She became Empress of India in 1882. But no one was alive by then to remember Ranjit Singh's remark on her accession in 1837. When Ranjit Singh was told that she had now become the Queen of England, he remarked, "She wants to dedicate her dear life looking after the interests of the people and on managing her kingdom." And then she added that a person becomes so involved in physical pleasures that one cannot attend to such affairs, and is much drowned in the whirlpool of carnal gratification that one hardly can raise one's head with the overwhelming waves of such pleasures. Only Ranjit Singh, from experience, would have understood that. By 1849, the Sikh court of Lahore, which once was the epicenter of the Punjab, had become a memory, and it was kept alive by miniature artists. The Sikh Darbar, which was once made history, was now relegated to it. The throne of the Punjab, Maharaja Ranjit Singh's throne, lay empty, and there was no Punjabi, man enough or woman enough, to fill it. Nuruddin's son, Zahuruddin, was appointed the tutor to Dalip Singh, and he taught him Arabic and Persian until Dalip Singh converted to Christianity. One doesn't need to teach a convert Arabic. He accompanied him to Fatehgarh and stayed with him until the conversion. His younger brother, Kamruddin, accompanied Rani Jinda to Banaras, and his duty was to go into the tent every evening and to recognize that Maharani Jinda was still in the tent. He then, once he had reached Banaras, returned with the jewelry that she had taken with her. It is to Kamruddin that we owe many of the details that I've narrated to you of which incident occurred at which part of the fort, and he then identified the Darul Shifa, which was the Gulab Khana, where the faqirs operated, kept their apothecary, and the Maktab Khana, where Azizuddin stored with considerable diligence the treaties and state papers. There are a few documents which are available outside the Punjab archives, but one of them, which I was able to consult, since they're all in Persian, was the Roznamcha, maintained by Faqir Azizuddin. There are very few gifts associated with that period, and one of them is very intriguing, and this is an alarm clock. The way it operated was they put gunpowder in the barrel and then tilted the mirror so that when the rays of the sun would ignite the gunpowder, it would go pop. Time, though, was against the faqirs. The last to survive of the three, Azizuddin, Imamuddin, and finally Nuruddin, Nuruddin the last died in March 1852. The three brothers were then buried in the old city side by side as they had stood shoulder to shoulder when they were alive. Less than 10 kilometers away, across the old city, across the city of Lahore, was Princess Bamba, the last surviving granddaughter of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the youngest, the daughter, but the last surviving daughter of Maharaja Dalip Singh. And when she died in 1957, she was buried in the Christian graveyard, the last relic of the Sikh Raj. The painting that once belonged to Dalip Singh and was then inherited by her was sold to the Punjab government, and it's on display in the Lahore fort. And it is a reminder of the glory of the fabled Sikh court of Lahore. It is said that when she was living in Model Town in the closing years of her life, she tried to catch a bus from Model Town. And when there was no place on the bus, she would shake her umbrella at the bus conductor and say that there was a time when my family owned the Punjab, and now I can't even get a place on a bus. Let me end the lecture in the way that I ended my book. And the last paragraph of it I'll read to you. One winter evening, more than a century ago, Nuruddin's son Faqir Kamruddin gathered two of his young grandchildren, and enveloping them in his warm woolen chokha, he narrated to them events from his past, of how he had traveled with the Queen of the Punjab, Rani Jinda, to Banaras at such speed that the elephants went blind because of the dust. In Punjabi, Hatniyan aniyan ho gayiyan san. Of the Maharani's insistence on calling him by his pet name, Dolu. And I had independent confirmation of this when a great aunt of mine, when I narrated this story to her, she said, "Oda naam Dolu si." And something that I'd read in the reports was confirmed by this oral evidence. And he reminded them of the unforgettable sight of the glittering darbars, of the slayings and murders in the Lahore fort. He told them of the three men that they would never see, except through his eyes. His eldest uncles, Azizuddin and Imamuddin, and his own father, Nuruddin. Three men in modest garments, with discreet manners, silken voices, and a gift for expression that made them indispensable to as discerning a ruler as Ranjit Singh. A self-made Maharaja, Ranjit Singh, above all, knew the value of self-made fakirs. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Fakir Ijazuddin, for this absolutely sparkling lecture with wonderful paintings that you've shown that some of us have actually never seen. Some of them are quite familiar, but a whole lot of them are not. So thank you so much for that absolutely wonderful presentation.